Hey everyone, due to the sensitive nature of many of the topics that I talk about, my videos generally do not get monetized. So if you'd like to donate at all in any capacity, there are links down below, specifically a Patreon. Thank you very much everybody for watching. He's so unorganized. Okay. All right, so okay, this is actually what we're looking for. This is part 1. This is part 2 and this is part 3. Jesus.
COVID? I think we got him through this term. We would always show shots of him jogging, him in aviator shades, and like you paint him as a young geriatric. We were creating story there that we didn't know anything about. You know, we were. That's. I think that's propaganda. Look what we did. We got Trump back. I am 100% going to say it, and I 100% believe it. That if it wasn't for CNN, I don't know that Trump would have got voted out. Our focus was to get Trump out of office, right? Without saying it, that's what it was, right? So our next thing is going to be for climate change awareness.
Do you think it's going to be just like a lot of like fear, like climate?
Yeah, fear sells. Fear sells. No one ever.
Yeah, this is like weird. Like, I mean, is it a hot take? Like CNN's trying to get rid of Trump, and then Fox tries to get rid of Biden. I mean, this is like this is the game, right? It's unfortunate that we don't have the full unedited footage because, you know, some of this could be out of context. But like, yeah, fear sells. Sex sells. It's the unfortunate reality of life. Not to be that guy, but if anything, this is exposing more capitalism, I guess, if anything. I'm a capitalist, so. But like, yeah, this is what sells. Like, yay, fear, upsetting people, riling their emotions sells. So let's continuously rile people's emotions. Yeah.
Says those things out loud, but it's obvious.
And what is it you do?
Technical director. It's one step down from director.
Okay. I don't even know what
It's going to be our focus. Our focus was to get Trump out of office. Without saying it, that's what it was. Trump his hand was shaking or whatever, and he was losing it. He's unfit. We were creating story there. So that's. I think that's propaganda.
So I'm standing here at 30 Hudson Yards. Warner Media isn't right there. That's CNN.
I mean, like, what'd she say? Oh, do you think that's propaganda? He's like, yeah, probably.
CNN's corporate headquarters. We're in New York City. Jim Sciutto just walked out. Funny enough, I asked him about the videos we have just obtained of a CNN director, Charlie Chester, on tape. For years, we've heard that CNN is the most trusted name in news, but a CNN director is on tape telling us...
Who the fuck did you hear that from? I guess, does CNN say that they're the most trusted name in news?
Propaganda, helping a certain political candidate, employees admitting what we've always known to be true. This time, it's on tape.
Look what we did. We got Trump back. I am 100% going to say it.
I want to see how the whole date went.
I 100% believe it. That if it wasn't for CNN, I don't know that Trump would have got voted out. I really don't think so.
Oh, really? I think if COVID hadn't happened, it wouldn't have mattered what covered, and Trump would still be in office.
I believe. No, I came to CNN because I wanted to be a part of that.
This guy seems like a really bad date. It seems like, honestly, I think part of this, like, do I think that CNN played a role? For sure. Like, the outlets battle against each other to pick their champion. But like, this guy's like, yeah, I did that. I got rid of Trump. I'm the most powerful man in the world. This guy seems like he has more of an ego problem than anything else. I guess he just thinks he can get pussy by saying that he has like any level of control over the world.
So Chester says that CNN is responsible for getting Trump out of office and helping Biden through his term. Listen to this tape. Chester and Hoffman believe CNN managed to get Trump out of office. Their words.
Really censoring
and Chester calls CNN propaganda.
Yeah, I mean, like Trump, we did it. Like when Trump was, I don't know, like his hand was shaking or whatever. We brought in like so many medical people to like all tell a story that like it was all speculation. That he was like neurological damage, like that he was losing it. He's unfit to, whatever. We were creating story there that we didn't know anything about. We were. So that's I think that's propaganda. We had nothing else to run with at that time. We were like just taking shots off the bow, just hoping something would hit.
I guess I have a confession. I worry about Biden and his health, I guess.
Your news health?
What? No, I said Biden, our president. Like I want to just like literally,
his health.
I just want to like take care of him and make sure he's okay. Like
He's definitely the whole thing of him running during the entire run for the campaign, showing him jogging was obviously a deflection of his aim, and they're trying to make it like I'm healthy.
Is that what we did? I don't know. Like, what do you mean?
We would always show shots of him jogging, and that I'm healthy, blah blah blah, and him in aviator shades, and like you paint him as a young geriatric. I like so many arguments about like my dad be like, you're voting in Kamala Harris because he's gonna die in the presidency, and I'm like, that could die.
Right. I don't think he's gonna
But
die.
I'm okay with that.
Right.
I'm okay with that. I think she could
She'd
be
probably
a bitch.
be better, but
Probably could be a bitch in like a board meeting,
Yeah.
and you'd hate her as a boss. But she's real and better than what we've had.
Right.
Regardless,
yeah.
I don't see. I think we got him through this term.
Even after Biden was sworn in, CNN still seemed to maintain a bias in the reporting, according to Chester.
And then so there are complaints that like we're not covering that Biden tripped up the stairs.
Oh, did you?
Like we talked about it briefly, but
But you talk about that briefly. You don't make that a huge
okay. So, but
story.
the fact that we talk about the Trump tripping is a bigger nuance. It's a nuanced conversation because that's a sign
Did
of.
we harp on Trump tripping? I think we talked about it a little bit. As long as we talk about it a little bit with Biden, then I think we're
But like we didn't cover it at all on Dawn. Like we didn't talk about it. Whereas if it had been Trump tripping up the stairs.
Chester didn't just take credit for Trump's loss. He also alleges it was...
What is this, like a fucking double date? What the hell's going on here? I don't understand.
CNN's, quote, focus. They were focused on getting Trump out of office. Chester also believes that in the current news cycle, there is, quote, COVID fatigue. Chester saying that CNN has a game plan to fix that fatigue.
I think there's just like a COVID fatigue. So like whenever a new story comes up, they're going to latch onto it. They've already announced.
Yeah, what? Yeah, there's a COVID fatigue. Well, bro, what are you talking about? COVID fatigue is literally the Republican platform, right? Hey, I'm really tired of COVID-19. Let's just get back to it. And so, like, yeah, people are caring less and less. So, I mean, is CNN trying to make it seem like a bigger deal than it is? I mean, maybe. I don't know. COVID seems pretty bad, maybe. But, like, this isn't like a hot take. Like, this doesn't really expose very much to me so far.
Their office that once the public will be open to it, we're going to start focusing mainly on climate.
Yeah, that seems more like, hey, we're going to shift to climate change now that the COVID's over because people aren't caring enough. So we're going to push climate change fear.
Climate, like global warming, and like that's going to be our next, like, I don't know, like, what's the word I'm looking for? It's going to be our focus. Like our focus was to get Trump out of office, right? Without saying it, that's what it was, right? So our next thing is going to be for climate change awareness.
What does that look like?
I don't know. I'm not sure. I have a feeling it's just going to be like constantly showing videos of like decline in ice and weather warming up and like the effects it's having on the economy and really
Who
talking about
decides that?
the head of the network, like just
Who's that? Is that Zucker?
Zucker. Yeah, I imagine that he's got his council and they've all like discussed like where they think
So that's like the next.
pandemic like story like that will be to death, but that one's got longevity, you know what I mean? It's not like there's a definitive ending to the pandemic, or like it'll taper off to a point that it's not a problem anymore. I think it's going to take years, so they'll probably be able to milk that for quite a bit, so we'll see.
So Climate change overload. Okay.
Be prepared. It's coming. Stories, like right now, we had an inside track right now where 2 stories are going to be pushed. Climate change is going to be the next COVID thing for CNN. We're gonna hone in.
Focus on that.
I love it.
But that's a fair thing to focus on.
But to commit to that as a network,
You said it's going to be like the new COVID.
I feel like, well, that's the way it was built.
Dude, what? This
Unless
isn't
that
like
was just a call to arms to get people to start writing.
none of this is like a hot take. Like, oh, news outlets try to make money. Like, yeah, it's the shitty. Like, we've all been talking about how shitty the news has been. No.
Trust a name of news. Your own employees, your own director is on tape actually telling the American people what we all believe to be true. The question is,
Our focus was to get Trump out of office, right? Without saying it, that's what it was.
why isn't Charlie Chester willing to say the private part publicly? He'll say it privately, but he insists it's important to conceal it, to hide it from people. And that's the question, Mr. Zucker. Why is it so important to hide the truth of what you're really trying to do from the people?
I feel like if anybody, does anybody think that CNN wasn't trying to get Trump out of office? I'm not saying it's right, but this isn't like a hot take here. I'm like, this is just some dickhead that's like, yeah, CNN didn't want Trump in office. Yes. And Fox does the same thing. That's a media problem. And then it gets into a conversation of like, what can we really do about it? Like, what do we have the government start controlling the media? Well, that just makes things worse.
Gangbusters with ratings. Gangbusters with ratings, right?
I also wish he would just put out the whole date. I want to watch the whole date.
This is why we constantly have the death toll on the side. Let's make it higher. Like, why isn't it high enough, today? Like, it would make our point better if it was higher. It's fear. Like, fear really drives numbers. Fear is the thing that keeps you tuned in.
Yeah.
If it bleeds, it leads. Yeah.
If it bleeds, it leads.
Yeah. No one ever says
That sounds pretty bad.
those things out loud, but it's obvious. What they're actually doing,
It's just like so crazy how sensationalized this story is about CNN,
telling the person what to say. It's an art form.
It's like, let's do it to everybody. Like, let's go after Fox News next for doing the same shit. But the problem is that Project Veritas is like a conservative outlet. So like, they're not going to go after conservatives. So they're a very biased source, which like hurts their credibility.
It's always leading them in a direction before they even open their mouth. It's fear. Like, fear really drives numbers. Fear is the thing that keeps you tuned in.
What actually happens when a network cares more about ratings than the truth? In the case of CNN, owned by parent company Warner Media, it seems that CNN has resorted to other means in order to keep you watching. What you're about to see is so shocking. Admissions about COVID, its impact, the bias, and things that we've all suspected but have never been able to confirm until now.
It's fear. Like, fear really drives numbers. It does, The happiest days in news, people, I would imagine, turn it off and then they go with the family. They don't stay glued to it. Unless there's something that's uniting them, like the moon landing or something like that. Fear is the thing that keeps you tuned in, I imagine. What's the scariest thing there? Sad news doesn't do well with ratings. Like, if you can get someone impassioned, that does really well with ratings. Sad news, back to back to back, doesn't do really well unless it affects them directly. COVID, gangbusters with ratings, right?
Yeah, I mean, like, what do we like? Does anybody surprise? I'm just like, yeah, these are things that we all know. Like, yeah, emotionally provocative things are good for ratings for sure.
Which is why we constantly have the death toll on the side, which I have a major problem with, that we're tallying how many people die every day. Because I've even looked at it and be like, let's make it higher. Like, why isn't it high enough, today? Like, it would make our point better if it was higher. And I'm like, what am I rallying for, that's a problem.
Yeah.
We're doing that. You know?
Yeah, and that statement was like weirdly like almost identifiable. What he just said was like, "Hey, I'm caught. Sorry, I'm caught in this trap of like chasing sensationalized news stories because it gives us ratings, and like obviously, as a business, they want ratings. That's what media is. They're a business." And then he finds himself wishing more people died for more ratings. And then he's like, wow, what have I become? That's basically what that was. That was just him like having an existential moment there. You know? Same thing with like any content creator. Like myself, like, oh, I'm making videos that are very provocative. I'm like, wait, what am I doing with myself? You know what I mean? And it kind of, you get into this like cycle.
You know, like,
Well, I mean, it helps with ratings.
of course, yeah, but yeah, I would expect. I have a job, sure. Like, I'm happy about that, but yeah, I don't know.
Who gets to like decide how long that stays on, or like?
Head of the network. I've been in the room many a times where my director tells me take it down, and I take it down, and then we get a phone call, like the bat phone like rings in the back. It's literally a red phone, like this special red phone rings.
Yeah.
And they pick it up, and this producer picks it up, and you're mop, 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 mop. And every so often they put it on speaker, and it's like the head of the network being like, there's nothing that you're doing right now that makes me want to stick. Put the numbers back up, because that's the most enticing thing that we have. So put it back up. So like things like that are constantly talked about.
It's most likely a Jeff Zucker call. If Jeff Zucker, the head of our CNN, he makes the call, someone
Is that like the head of the network with the red bat phone?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Now, in the first video, Charlie Chester and Rachel Hoffman gave us a first-hand account into how CNN's president, Jeff Zucker, really is on a minute-to-minute basis, even when it comes to graphics on the screen, COVID graphics. Charlie Chester referring to the red phone that rings to update the graphics, because remember, folks, it's all about ratings.
Yeah. I'm so confused. That's how every like media outlet is. This is just exposing media in general. Why
don't you guys at CNN show the recovery rates on the death tolls at least?
That'd be nice.
Recovery rates.
What is a recovery?
Oh, who's had it and then
Oh yeah, that makes sense.
recovered. Because that's not scary.
That's true. It's fucked up. It's true.
Yeah.
That's what I figured.
If it bleeds, it leads. Yeah.
If it bleeds, it leads.
Yep.
I like that.
I think no one ever says those things out loud, but it's obvious based on like the amount of stories that we do. Like the fact that we have a segment called The Good Stuff, which is a feel-good thing, but it's a dedicated moment at the end to like almost like be the ice cream to alleviate, you know, like everything that you've been through, like, you know, like something sweet to end it with. Because everything else is like doom and gloom. I mean, it's human nature. I mean, like I find myself watching more news when there's something looming and scary.
Chester seems to have lost faith in CNN's ability to do honest reporting, not just at CNN actually, but in news generally.
I mean, there's no such thing as unbiased news. It just doesn't exist.
Yeah.
There's too many agendas. There's too many people that have jobs that need to feed their families for it to be unbiased. You can't. It's impossible. Of course, the most unbiased news is grassroots, out of people's basements with podcasts. That's the most unbiased you probably get. You know. And unfortunately,
Yeah, that's true. This guy seems to understand. Like, yeah, people like sensationalized news, unfortunately, and like reporters chase it, and they've basically become like a fucking demon. We'll say all news outlets, major news outlets, have become like demons. And yeah.
Actually, the trend is that when they could actually start making money off of it, you start to inherently
shift towards making more of that
destroy the
content.
thing that you love.
Yeah, so yeah.
By like
Do you
moving
think
up.
CNN's done that?
Yeah. I don't think CNN's any different than Fox. I think it's on the different side of it.
Yeah, I agree.
But I don't.
This guy's an honest guy.
I think
I
they come off
appreciate
as very
that.
altruistic, but I think we bury the lead a lot. I think we.
What's that mean?
You ever watch? We have to sit down and watch it together for me to like point out some things. Listen to the way they ask questions, because they're not actually asking questions.
Who?
Any reporter on
the-
CNN.
okay.
What they're actually doing is they're telling the person what to say. It's an art form in it.
What's it?
There's an art form to it, but it would be like
So burying the lead basically sounds like you're trying to prime somebody into believing a particular thing by pushing secondary details first. So when they say burying the lead, I'm going to assume what they mean is like, oh, let's say something happens. Let's say a black guy gets shot, right? And what happened is, what happened is that like there was an altercation between a black guy and a police officer, and the black guy pulls a gun out and shoots, so the police officer shoots and kills him. Burying the lead would be like, okay, I have a story I want, so I want to make it seem like this is a race issue when it's not. So we're going to say, oh, a black man was gunned down today by a police officer. You give the time, you give the date, you give this, you that, and then towards the more middle to the end of the story, you're like, oh, the guy had a gun, and it's like this way you have primed somebody into believing a particular thing before you get to the actual core of the story. Because if you just put the actual core of the story out there without providing your take or what the take you want to be in there, you can manipulate people into believing a particular thing. That's what you'd call priming. It's like similar to like if you're gonna, let's say you have a friend and you're going on a double date, right? It's like you, your girlfriend, your friend, and then your girlfriend's friend. And what you'll do is be like, hey, she's really nice, she's really pretty, she has a fat ass, whatever. You'll say whatever. That's priming. You're trying to get them to have a particular perspective, and then when they meet them, they'll be more encouraged to like them. Whereas like you could just throw them into the situation, and like they will be able to make up 100% of their mind. That's what it is. That's basically what burying the lead kind of is.
the accident that you just saw, right? Like one of the reporters would be like, so that man clearly went through the intersection, slamming into this car or whatever it was, and it really is unfortunate that our infrastructure of traffic lights and whatnot is falling apart in the city. How do you feel about the traffic lights and the infrastructure and whatnot? We've led them to talk about how we want them to talk about it. It's always like leading them in a direction before they even open their mouth.
Yeah.
And the only people that we let on the air, for the most part, are people that have a proven track record of taking the bait. I think there's like an art to manipulation. I think a lot
That's an interesting point. I'm assuming they meet outside of their journalists. The only people they pull onto the air are people who like believe the bullshit that they're spewing.
Some people have figured it out inherently, but
Like with the media, or just like in
media
general?
and in just conversations.
Yeah.
I think when like you ever meet somebody that like you feel like you're being gaslit by, start to listen to how they word things.
It's CNN.
What do you mean?
Inflection, saying things like twice, like there's little subtleties to.
I find it weird more than anything else that this guy thinks that like saying all this thing is going to get him some pussy at the end of this date. That's the part that gets me. This guy's like, yeah, I have all these like really deep things on CNN, and it's like, you want to fuck me later? And it's like, bro, what the hell?
How to manipulate people.
What's the difference between doing that like on a one-on-one basis or like a widespread news
Oh
organization.
yeah, I mean it's enough to change the world.
Yeah, for sure.
You know.
I agree.
Yeah.
Isn't that the plan?
There's a plan. I think this time it worked with like the Trump thing, but look at the other side, how devastated they were. So were we the good guys, the bad guys? Depends on which side you were looking at it, though. You know. Yeah.
Chester is fully aware
It's true.
of the power that CNN has over people. His words should caution people.
I find it interesting that they left in the bit where he talked about how Fox is just as bad as CNN, which I agree with. It's nice for somebody to acknowledge that. And like he's just really still trying to, like, you see how like this guy, I don't know what his name is, but he's being just as manipulative as the CNN guy. He's like, oh, you see how this CNN is bad, but, and he's not telling you, like, he's not even referencing the part where he brought Fox up. And this is more of a media exposed than CNN exposed. This is manipulative tactics. When they say CNN is constantly, if you watched this without any priming from him, you'd go, wow, the media is pretty shitty. But you're being primed by him to feel like it's a CNN exclusive issue. And so now this is where we are.
Everywhere, who takes the journalism at these corporations.
And for people saying out there, people are like, oh, we need like a new unbiased media source. I'm telling you that the reason that unbiased news isn't hit is because is not emotionally provocative. The only unbiased media source that you could probably pull off is going to be like an media. So like you would need somebody who focuses on debunking other media bullshit and then proposing the facts in like a provocative way if you wanted it to hit. That's the unfortunate reality. I think someone like Jon Stewart was doing a good job at that. I don't see that happening in The Daily Show nowadays with Trevor Noah. Not a particular fan. I feel like it's gotten a little too progressive. Like Jon Stewart was always like a progressive, but like, you know, I don't know. It feels like they're falling for some of these fucking narratives here.
Seriously, he tells us not to take it seriously. Chester tells us explicitly how the news business works. Now, if you thought this was bad, stay tuned for the next one, because in the next one, Chester gives us CNN's roadmap to the reality that they want you to believe.
Okay. Sure. Let's watch that. Oh, it's a lot of shit here. Very interesting.
Black men that have been attacking Asian. What are you doing? Like we're trying to like help like with the BLM.
Yeah, like is that a hot take? Like that's the unfortunate reality is that like, you know, like they're Asians and black people tend to go at it. And so there's a lot of, I think my understanding is there's a disproportionate amount of violence from black people to Asian people. And so like the narrative they want to push is like stop Asian hate, but they're not prescribing who the hater is, because if they did, they'd have to acknowledge it's black. It's generally black people. And like that takes away from the BLM movement because it's just a way for people to invalidate that movement, which isn't right, because this gets into a conversation about intersectionality. But it's interesting between the takes. The stop Asian hate is an anti-hatred movement, whereas the way that the media pushes BLM is an anti-white movement. And it's very interesting how that whole thing goes. And it's actually shitty because I think that, funny enough, usually the emotionally provocative stuff is more compelling, but you see Stop Asian Hate, I've seen it in malls. I see it on like mall billboards. Stop Asian Hate is an anti-hatred movement that's gotten better traction, in my opinion, and better effectiveness than BLM has, because of the way that the media has pushed BLM as anti-white rather than anti-hate. Which goes into just what really goes to show you that, again, anti-whiteness ends up becoming anti-blackness, because when you push BLM as anti-black when you push BLM as anti-white instead of pro-black, people tend to disassociate from BLM. They don't want to align with BLM because they find it offensive to them when the movement itself shouldn't be offensive. And that's, I think, largely a media issue. And you're seeing that on TikTok. You're seeing pro-BLM being less about positive, like PLM. You see a lot of pro-BLM movements on TikTok being less about emboldening or empowering black people and more about like deconstructing and like diminishing white people, which doesn't help. So like, again, anti-whiteness very much is anti-blackness.
Charlie Chester will shock you even more. This time, we see Chester reconciling the truth that actually exists compared to what happens in his own network.
I was trying to do some research on like the Asian hate, like the people are getting attacked or whatever. A bunch of black men that have been attacking Asian. So I'm like, what are you doing? Like we're trying to like help like with the BLM and like you're gonna.
This is the problem with overly generalizing here, because now like this is like we really, I mean, honestly, what good does it really do us to acknowledge that it's black? Like that's any group of people hurting the other group of people. Shouldn't we focus more on the group of people being hurt rather than who's hurting them necessarily? It's like, oh, well, it's black men hurting Asian people, but like it's mostly pieces of shit hurting Asian people. It's violent pieces of shit. It's not black people. It's violent pieces of shit. And when we prescribe race to these things, all of a sudden, like it turns into a race war. We're not helping. That's the problem.
Like
it's the same thing when it comes to like white people and like like black people getting hurt. It's like, oh, well, this white guy, but that doesn't really help black people. You know, it's just racially loading everything rather than focusing on solutions. And as you can see, like we're not actually hitting any solutions for any marginalized group in the United States.
I mean, it's individuals. It's not a people, you know? That's not good. The optics of that are not good. These little things like that are enough to set back movements, you know? Because the far left will start to latch on and create a story of like criminalizing an entire people, you know, just easier headlines that way, I guess.
It's like a weird thing to dissect. I mean, he's saying that like toxic progressives, like leftists, are going to start consuming themselves, and like, yeah, that's probably true. Yeah, like the anti-hatred movements will start to eat each other up because, you know, you find out that it's very progressive to hate white people, but like if it's other groups of marginalized groups hurting each other, then it starts hurting their message because their message is anti-group rather than pro-group. It's anti-group that we perceive as hurting our group rather than pro our group.
Yeah, I don't know.
So you're saying that the far left would label a whole
I kind of miss this
genre
point too.
of people? I kind of miss your point.
This guy is a little kooky, a little silly.
No, the conservatives. I'm sorry, not the far left. But
What?
I've noticed that like you'll get headlines that might lump people together as opposed to focusing on the individual.
What the? It's very weird. This guy's so careful to like not say the wrong thing. But like I find it so funny because I get what he's saying. He's saying, well, if we do the anti-Asian thing, or excuse me, the Stop Asian Hate thing, what's going to happen is conservatives are going to latch on to the fact that it's black people doing it. But you guys do the same identity politic bullshit. This is an exposure for like all media, progressives and conservatives.
I mean, that's what Trump ended up doing with like the China virus, and that puts so much blame on an entire group of people as opposed to a few careless individuals.
Right, the actual.
But isn't that what the whole progressive narrative is nowadays? You know, like the whole anti-whiteness narrative. Like you're focusing on you're generalizing all white people when it's like a very small amount of white people who like propagate racism. It's just like so funny how they're both the same. Like it really is like the everybody plays this bullshit identity politics. Nobody's focused on solutions.
Source, right?
Yeah.
I mean, but is it normal for the media to like, so say there's a white shooter, black shooter, which one are we gonna, like?
Yeah, the longest while, like this.
So like again, this gets back to what the narrative is, what sells. Okay, so historically, it's so funny because when it comes to like serial killers, we grossly underreport non-white serial killers. historically, even though like I think the most for lack of a better term successful serial killer was a black guy. And it's very interesting because the reason that it seems like most serial killers are white is because historically people only cared about white people on the news, so you would only see the white serial killer killing other white people, where white women are generally stereotyped more as innocent damsels in distress, where you won't see, like, let's say, like a black serial killer push into the forefront, because people, like, media wise, like, people don't care about black issues they didn't care about black people. And black women have a this gets into like intersectionality. Black women face similar issues, or face the same issues as women, but then they also face issues as being black on top of that. And being a black woman generally comes with a stereotype of masculinity, and people tend to care less about masculine figures. We get into like this whole conversation nowadays. Of course, you're only going to show the white shooter because you want to drive up racial tensions, and so it's like, oh, white guy shoots a black person, let's put it out there, and then they'll ignore like when a black person shoots a white person or something else, because they're trying to be emotionally provocative, and kind of gets into that conversation.
Story was like, people were like lapping up that it was like, you know, white guys for like so long. I don't know. I haven't seen anything about focusing on the color of people's skin that aren't white. They just aren't saying anything. You know what I mean? They're just not. All of a sudden, that story loses a little steam, and they just like leave it be.
Why?
I don't know. I think it's got to be trends, like what people will latch onto. You know.
You're telling Michelle, you're telling me, you're saying like how media is the greatest weapon. Where were you gonna go with that?
I mean, it's just propaganda. Like, it can really. Sorry, my chime just went off.
What do you mean by propaganda?
Like, you can shape an entire people's perception about anything on how you do it, right? Like,
How do you do that?
just by like forcing the story
What kind of a fucking date is this? Why is this guy engaging so much with this?
To help like your platform, you know, like you can all of a sudden say like coal is the future of like energy. Well, that could be propaganda because like who owns the company might have stake in like coal mining. So like,
Yeah, he must be very lonely.
Trump getting blasted all over like constant feeds of like Twitter and Fox giving him a platform is what fueled that fire, you know?
Is CNN the most trusted name in news? Their own employees are telling us that they're not. But the same employees that tell us that they're not are also participating in the propaganda that they're ashamed of. And that's perhaps the greatest tragedy of all. That Charlie Chester is willing to say these things privately. He's willing to say the quiet part out loud, privately. But they don't have the courage to say so publicly. And as Jim Shoto told...
I still find it like it's so ironic that you have a conservative news outlet distorting what this guy... Like, they're not heavily distorting it, but they're distorting what this guy is saying to make it seem like it's like something we never knew about, and to make it seem like conservative outlets don't do it. And ironically, Project Veritas is exposing themselves to doing the same thing that CNN does.
Told me when I was walking out of this door, he's been a journalist for 25 years. Well, Jim Sciutto, your own colleagues should have the courage to say publicly what they'll tell us privately. And if you're a journalist, you should stand up and do exactly that. Stand by the credo of journalism. Inform the people. You have an obligation and a duty to the people without fear or favor. I doubt Charlie Chester will be the last employee we hear from at CNN. Stay tuned, America.
Yeah, man. It's unfortunate because Project Veritas has very much like they've they've become anti-progressive media. This always happens, man. It's always kind of happens where like you're not going to get your unbiased source, because let's say I don't know the history of Project Veritas. Let's say it started as like a grassroots campaign to expose media issues. But then what happens next? Well, the conservatives very clearly latched onto it, and so they started making more content that's like leans towards their conservative base. And that kind of makes them less credible. But yeah, it's hard to get unbiased media like out. It's really impossible. Nobody really wants to sit down and have the conversation. Hey everyone, if you liked that video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And don't forget to follow my Twitch, Instagram, Twitter, Discord, and TikTok. All links are in the description. Also, check out my Patreon if you'd like to support me even more than you already do. Thank you so much, everyone. I love you all.